This is huge. The U.S. government is using TikTok to make a massive power grab that affects your freedom, your rights, and yes, even your money. The threat is real. I'm going to break it down for you today. Let's get it. Welcome to BitBoy Crypto. My name is Ben. Today we're going to be talking about the so-called TikTok ban. It's actually a pair of bills called the Restrict Act in the Senate and the Data Act in the House. Both of these pieces of legislation are using fear of the CCP and its influence on TikTok to push through a sweeping overhaul of how information is exchanged online. It's like the Patriot Act on bath salts. Can't believe I'm going to say this, but passing either of these bills would mean the U.S. has all but eliminated free speech in the country. If you violate the law, well, you can have all your property seized under civil forfeiture, be fined $1 million, and face a minimum sentence of 20 years in prison. All for something as simple as using your cell phone to watch a video. Insane. Let's get one thing straight. No fan of the CCP. It's common knowledge that they are one of the worst governments on the planet, have a long list of oppression and subjugation. TikTok is no doubt being used by the CCP, and it's not a bad idea to reel it in, if not, ban it outright. These bills aren't doing that, and they don't just stop at targeting the CCP. The Restrict Act and Data Act are sweeping broad and give the Secretary of Commerce and Director of National Intelligence nearly unchecked powers, not just to enforce this draconian law, but add more countries to the list. Stated goals of the bills are to keep foreign regimes from influencing or posing a national security risk or risk to the safety of U.S. persons. Everything the Commerce Secretary does is approved, and their actions are only subject to disapproval by the U.S. Congress. Let me be clear. Elected representatives can only stop the secretary after the fact, after the damage is done and lives are ruined. But why? Why is this happening, and why does the White House want it to happen so quickly? They're using TikTok as the scapegoat, telling us that TikTok is harvesting user data to influence elections or spread disinformation. But isn't Facebook doing the same thing? Not supposed to ask those questions. They're saying that Xi Jinping is doing mass surveillance on U.S. citizens and will use that information against us. Hasn't an NSA, CIA, FBI, and IRS been doing that as well? What's that? That's right, not supposed to bring up those questions either. The government knows they're losing the narrative, and they're desperate to get control of the message going out to American citizens. The case against TikTok, well, it may be real, and it could be being used to surveil us. But the Restrict Act and Data Act goes way too far beyond just TikTok. Puts unelected deep state operatives in control of every single way we communicate online. And they can take your house away from you if you break the rules. So let's get into the nasty details of just how bad these bills are. The Data Act is a follow-up to the original TikTok ban put forth by Donald Trump in 2020 that failed to circumvent a rule called the Berman Amendments. According to the Berman Amendments, information or informational materials cannot be banned. So the Data Act adds a new definition of sensitive data that is bannable. It's a crafty bit of doublespeak. Now, what's the difference between information and sensitive data? I'll give you an example. Hi, I'm Ben, and I'm happy today. What did I just do? Well, I didn't do a TikTok dance, but I just gave data relating to my mental or psychological health, and that's considered sensitive data. See how broad this is? So the Data Act is bad and wants to restrict what you do online, but is limited just to TikTok. In fact, it's similar to, and I'm not making this up, the Anti-Social CCP Act, which was put together by Marco Rubio. So where the Data Act wants to make sharing anything online a possible federal offense, the Restrict Act is there to put you in jail for using a VPN or even going to a website. The Restrict Act was put together by a bipartisan coalition of senators headed by John Thune, Joe Manchin, and Mark Warner, among others. Its stated goal is to stop foreign enemies from using the internet to harm U.S. citizens. Sounds pretty weird because I'm pretty sure we already have laws in place that do that. But the language of the bill is where things get very dark. The bill lists several governments as enemies, like CCP, Iran, Russia, and Cuba. It says that any entity, yes, that does include DAOs, controlled by them can have their transactions monitored and deemed a security threat. Any exchange of data that passes through a router or cell phone or a satellite network VPN, cloud service, AI, webcam, literally anything connected to the internet can be deemed a risk to the government or citizens, and at a moment's notice can be investigated whether you know it or not. This applies not only to videos and pictures, but text messages, audio, emails, and even sending crypto like Bitcoin or Ethereum. By now you may be saying, okay, Ben, that sounds bad, but we're just talking about enemies of America. What's the big deal? The big deal is that these definitions change. Threats can change depending on who's in power. With a stroke of a pen, this bill could encompass domestic threats as well. Anyone whom the government deems a threat can be disappeared by this unelected enforcement group with no oversight. And the penalties are steep. If you're thought to be aiding in the transaction of data, then you can be detained with no due process, fined $1 million, have all your physical and intellectual property taken from you via civil forfeiture, and be sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. Even if you're found innocent of these charges, the damage to your credit, your job, and your reputation could ruin your life forever. Because here's something else in the bill. Any action deemed necessary can be used to mitigate the threat. Any action. This is an assault on the internet and on free speech. It must be stopped. These bills would turn the U.S. into a communist country, full stop. You guys can click the link below to find your congressperson or senator and write, email, or call and respectfully tell them you do not approve of the Data Act and Restrict Act and see the bills as a threat to democracy. Please click the like button and share this video so more people get the message about just how bad this bill is. Hey, and let's stop it. That's all I got. Be blessed. BitBoy out.